out that ugly old tree. The parkway's our road now, not his.
Corinne Ashburn said it from the back of a white UTV in a Patagonia vest, with her Bluetooth earpiece blinking, while a landscaping crew she had personally hired gunned a chainsaw to life at the base of a 101-year-old juniper tree my grandfather had planted the summer he got back from World War I. The tree went down in 16 seconds. The stump landed on the granite boundary marker my grandfather had set at the same corner in 1924. The marker cracked. My son Wyatt, a wildland fire captain visiting from Idaho, was beside me watching. Corinne lifted her iced matcha latte toward the sky in a small, satisfied toast, turned her UTV around, and drove off down the road she called Whitaker Parkway. She thought she had just won a property dispute. She didn't know I was about to sell the entire 2,300 acres to the Nez Perce tribe, including the only road in and out of her subdivision. What would you have done? Where are you watching tonight? My name is Cole Hargrove. I'm 57 years old, and I ranch 2,300 acres in Wallowa County, Oregon, the high, wide, wind-scoured valley on the Idaho border that the Nimiipuu people, whom you may know as the Nez Perce, call home in a way my family never quite can. The Hargroves came to Wallowa in 1923 from County Mayo, Ireland. My grandfather Clyde bought a bankrupt homestead from a tax sale for $700. He did not know, at the time, that the land had been taken 46 years earlier from the bands of Chief Joseph in the forced removal of 1877. He learned. An elder named Joseph Watalatok found him on the pasture one spring afternoon in 1932 and told him, quietly, about the families who used to camp in that high meadow in July for the wallowing of the bison. My grandfather took his hat off. He listened. He wrote a promise down in the margin of his Bible that night. Someday the Hargroves will help the people come home. That promise passed to my father, Wendell. It passed to me. I have been a board member of the Wallowa Homeland Project, a nonprofit that partners with the Nez Perce tribe to return ancestral land, for 22 years. I speak enough Nimiiputiimt to say thank you and to argue about elk. My wife Louise passed in 2019 of pancreatic cancer. She was part Nez Perce on her mother's side, a descendant of a family that had been scattered in the removal. She had started reconnecting with her heritage the year before she got sick. I buried her on a ridge above our home, with the permission of her mother's cousins. Our son Wyatt is 29, wildland fire captain, Boise District. He does not want the ranch. He has told me so, calmly, every Thanksgiving for 7 years. I have told him, every Thanksgiving for 7 years, that I hear him and that the ranch is fine. The subdivision next door is called Bitterroot Ridge Estates. 96 beige timber frame houses, with fake log siding and steel roofs, built in 2011 by a developer from Portland who went bankrupt in 2014 and died in 2017. The subdivision sits on a bench above my south meadow. It has no way in or out except a gravel road the developer bulldozed straight across 12/10 of a mile of my ranch while I was in Portland with Louise for her first round of chemotherapy. He never asked. He never filed any easement. He simply did it. For 14 years, I did not make a fight of it. The HOA treasurer wrote me a check every January for $2,000 as a courtesy payment for informal road use. I banked it. I handed the ranch hand a waving hand when a subdivision family drove past. I figured, this is a small town. These are neighbors. We can all be grown-ups. Then, 2 years ago, Corinne Ashburn ran for HOA president on a platform of mountain lifestyle improvement. She won. She was a retired Portland marketing consultant with a 47,000-follower Instagram account called Mountain Mama. She wore Patagonia vests the way other people wear work coats. The first thing she did was stop the $2,000 courtesy check. The second thing she did was have signs printed that renamed my grandfather's Hall Road Whitaker Parkway, after her husband Sterling, who had donated $10,000 to the HOA's discretionary fund. The third thing she did was, on a Saturday morning in June, while Wyatt happened to be home visiting me, hire a landscaping crew to grade and widen the road, which, in the doing, tore out a 101-year-old juniper my grandfather had planted. I stood in the pasture beside my son. I did not say anything. The saw bit hit the wood. The tree came down. Corinne lifted her iced matcha latte at the sky. Wyatt looked at me. Dad, Are we fighting this? No, son, we're rearranging it. My attorney Delilah Radcliffe, a lean 44-year-old out of LeGrand, who had once argued a property case before the Oregon Supreme Court in a maternity dress, drafted the first letter that afternoon. She kept it polite. We asked the HOA to restore the $2,000 courtesy payment and to sit down with us to negotiate a formal, written easement that would memorialize the arrangement that had worked for 14 years. I drove the letter to the Joseph post office and sent it certified mail. Corinne Ashburn's response came back 9 days later, on letterhead from a Portland real estate firm where her husband Sterling had once been a senior partner. The letter claimed that the HOA now held a prescriptive easement across my land by operation of Oregon common law, because it had used the road openly, continuously, and for more than 10 years. It cited 3 Oregon Supreme Court cases. It threatened countersuit for interference with vested community access rights if I obstructed the use in any way. I read the letter twice. I walked to my filing cabinet. I opened the folder labeled HOA Courtesy. Inside were 14 years of canceled checks from the Bitterroot Ridge Estates HOA treasurer, made out to Clyde Hargrove Estate, $2,000 each, with the memo line, road use courtesy. 14 checks, 14 signed receipts I had given back, 14 annual tax 1099 forms. A knowledge nugget worth pinning. In most states, including Oregon, a prescriptive easement requires that the use be adverse, meaning against the owner's permission. A single document showing the use was permissive kills the prescriptive claim. 14 such documents, spanning 14 years, kills it 14 times over. Corinne did not know about the folder. I did not tell her. Instead, I hosted a small meeting in my barn the following Tuesday evening. I invited 6 HOA residents I thought might be reasonable. 3 came. One was a retired school teacher named Francis Abernathy. One was a young father named Jed Ogilvie, who had just moved in with 2 toddlers. One was a recently widowed former Forest Service hydrologist named Lorraine Pike. I laid out, quietly and without drama, the history of the road, the 14 years of courtesy payments, and the paperwork I had. I also told them, in plain terms, that I intended to resolve this without a lawsuit if I could, and that I did not bear them any personal grudge. They listened. At the end, Francis Abernathy asked me a question. "Mr. Hargrove, are you telling us we could lose our access?" "Mrs. Abernathy, I am telling you that whoever owns this land decides what happens to that road. For 14 years, that person was me. That person was polite." Jed Ogilvie quietly asked if his toddlers would be safe getting to the pediatrician. I told him I would give him 30 days written notice of any change, and personal help in arranging alternatives for his children if it came to that. Lorraine Pike said nothing for a long minute. Then she said quietly, "I voted for her. I am extremely sorry." "Mrs. Pike, you're not the one who owes me an apology." They left the barn at twilight. The sky over the Wallowas was the color of smoked salmon. Wyatt, who had been standing in the shadow by the hay bales, walked up beside me and said, "Dad, that was the kindest meeting I've ever seen you run." I was raised to be kind to people who still don't know what they've done. Word got back to Corinne within 48 hours. At the next HOA meeting, she denounced Francis, Jed, and Lorraine by name, accused them of collaborating with an outside adversary, and proposed a resolution stripping their committee seats. The vote passed 42 to 31. Francis resigned her vice presidency in protest and was replaced. Jed and Lorraine resigned their committee seats the same night. Francis Abernathy drove out to my ranch that Sunday afternoon with a pan of cornbread and a cold apology I refused to let her make again. "Mr. Hargrove, I have made a grave error of judgment by electing that woman, and I have made an even graver error by not speaking up sooner. Mrs. Abernathy, eat some cornbread. It's yours, after all." She laughed a tired laugh. We sat on the porch for an hour. She told me about her late husband, who had taught social studies at the Joseph High School for 31 years. She told me about her granddaughter in Bozeman, who wanted to be an archaeologist. Before she left, she said, softly, "Mr. Hargrove, whatever you decide to do, I would like to help." I nodded. I filed her name in a mental folder. I did not know yet that I would need it. Corinne Ashburn did not take the resignation of 3 community members as a sign she had misread the room. She took it as a sign she needed to consolidate. Within 10 days, she pushed through an emergency vote of the remaining HOA board to formally dedicate the road as Whitaker Parkway. Not merely signed, but engraved on a 4-foot stone monument at the subdivision entrance, which her husband Sterling paid $8,000 out of pocket to commission. The stone was hauled in on a flatbed, set on a concrete plinth, and blessed with a ribbon cutting that included a local county commissioner, a Portland television affiliate, and an acoustic guitarist Corinne had hired to play John Denver covers. I stood in my kitchen drinking coffee at 6 that morning and watched the flatbed rumble past my living room window. My dog Brett, a 14-year-old blue heeler, whined low. Wyatt, still in town, walked up beside me. "Dad, they're carving her husband's name on a rock on your land. They're carving her husband's name on a rock that sits on your great-grandfather's old pasture, yes. And we're patient." 2 days later, I drove into Joseph for fence staples and ran into Corinne at the post office. She was at the counter in a sage green vest and a silk scarf printed with dreamcatcher motifs. The post office was small and full, Tuesday lunchtime, and at least 9 people were within earshot when she saw me, turned in my direction, and raised her voice. "Mr. Hargrove, how's the bitter old rancher routine today?" I did not answer. "You know," she said, to the room at large now, "some of us in this county actually want to build things. Not everybody wants to sit on a mountain and resent the world because he lost his wife." The post office went quiet. The postmistress, a 59-year-old woman named Roberta Coyote, stopped her date stamp in midair. A retired logger in line behind me shifted his feet. I stepped up to the counter. I asked Roberta for a book of forever stamps. I paid. I thanked her. On my way out, I held the door for an elderly woman with a cane. I did not look at Corinne on the way past. In my truck in the parking lot, I sat very still for about 90 seconds. Then I took a small notebook from my glove box and wrote down the date, the time, the names of 3 witnesses I remembered by sight, and the exact phrase Corinne had used about Louise. A takeaway worth saving. If somebody publicly insults you or your family, in a way you may later need to document, write it down inside an hour. Date, time, place, quote, witnesses. Courts treat contemporaneous notes as far more credible than memories reconstructed months later. That afternoon, Corinne's road widening project began in earnest. A contractor out of Baker City, not one I recognized, brought in 3 dump trucks of aggregate, a grader, a 12-ton roller, and a small excavator. Over the next 4 days, they widened the road by 6 feet, graded the shoulders, and dumped fresh fill along a riparian buffer strip that ran down to Clearwater Creek. Clearwater Creek, which is a federally designated coho and steelhead salmon spawning tributary under BLM management, was now receiving road-grade sediment at an observable rate. I photographed. I time-stamped. I filed a water quality complaint with the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality that evening, along with a parallel filing with the National Marine Fisheries Service under the Endangered Species Act. Clearwater Creek has had documented steelhead presence since 1947. Bitterroot Ridge Estates had just poured 200 cubic yards of sediment-laden fill along its bank without a permit, without a biological assessment, and without so much as a courtesy call to the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest Office, whose boundary the creek crossed a half-mile downstream. By Friday morning, an Oregon DEQ inspector was on the road with a clipboard. By Friday afternoon, a National Marine Fisheries Service biologist was walking the stream bank. By Monday, Corinne's contractor had been issued a stop work order and a preliminary environmental enforcement action, with potential fines beginning at $40,000 per day of ongoing impact. Corinne, when she heard, called a friend of her husband's at the governor's office. The friend did not pick up. I drove up the county road that evening at dusk, past the stone monument with her husband's name carved on it, past the stopped excavator, past the yellow warning tape the federal biologist had strung along the creek. I rolled my window down. The wind off the Wallowas smelled of sage and wet fir. I listened, for about 2 minutes, to the creek running. Then I drove home. I made a grilled cheese. I sat down at my grandfather's oak desk, and I opened the bottom drawer. Inside was the Bible my grandfather had written his promise in 1932. I had not touched it in 15 years. The next morning, Corinne's husband Sterling called on his county commissioner friend a second time, and this time the friend picked up. By Tuesday, a memo had gone from the Wallowa County Road Department to the Oregon Department of Transportation, asking for a determination of whether Whitaker Parkway should be designated a de facto public road under ORS 368.201, a designation that, if granted, would have stripped most of my rights as the underlying landowner in favor of effective public access established over time. Delilah Radcliffe laughed her dry laugh when she saw the filing. Cole, they've now formally admitted, in writing, that they need the state to declare this road public because it is not, as of today, public. They have signed their own deposition.
Can we block it?
I already did. Submitted your 14 years of courtesy payments and receipts this morning. ODOT response? 48 hours, written denial, with a polite suggestion that the petitioners should consider the elements of their own argument more carefully before the next such filing. The county commissioner friend is not, I suspect, going to be a friend much longer. Wyatt was at the kitchen table. He had taken an extra week of leave to stay with me through this, which I had not asked him to do, and which I was not going to refuse. He looked up from his coffee. Dad, we're winning the procedural pieces. That woman still doesn't know she's lost. She doesn't. When are we going to tell her? I looked at my son across the table. He had my father's eyebrows. He had my mother's jawline. He had his own mother's stubborn, silent anger, which she had passed to him intact. Son, I don't think we're going to tell her. I think we're going to do the thing, and the thing is going to tell her.
What thing?
I took a breath. I thought about how to explain it. Wyatt, for 22 years I have sat on the board of the Wallowa Homeland Project. That nonprofit exists to return ancestral land to the Nez Perce tribe. Over the years, they have acquired parcels here and there. 100 acres, 500 acres, 1,000. They've been looking, for the past 18 months, for a contiguous parcel of high meadow habitat large enough to run a bison herd, protect salmon habitat, and host a youth cultural camp, roughly 2,000 acres, bordering the national forest, with clean water. They have federal grant funding in place, $12 million, waiting. I let that sit. Wyatt set his coffee down very carefully. Dad, you're not. I am. Our ranch, 2260 of it. I'll keep 40 acres around the house for us, a life estate. His eyes filled. He did not wipe them. He looked out the window at the south pasture. He looked at the ridge where his mother was buried. Dad, Mom always talked about, I know. She used to say, I know, son, that's why we're doing it. He got up. He walked to the window. He stood there a long minute with his back to me. Then he came back and he hugged me, which was a thing he had done exactly 3 times in his life. The morning of my wedding, the afternoon Louise died, and now. Dad, if you do this, she's going to find out exactly 3 hours too late. That's roughly the plan, yes. Okay. He wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand. Okay, what do you need me to do? I need you to keep your mouth shut for 61 days, and I need you to come with me Thursday to Wallowa. A knowledge nugget worth saving. In Oregon, a private party selling land to a federally recognized Indian tribe does not trigger state or county review rights in the way a commercial sale might. The transaction is private. Once the tribe takes title, the tribe can, as any owner could, terminate any unrecorded encroachments under state common law, with 30 days written notice in most cases. The timeline is faster than people realize. Thursday morning, Wyatt and I drove the 42 miles to Wallowa, Oregon, and I introduced him to a 61-year-old tribal council member named Margaret Broncho, who had known his mother. Margaret Broncho's office was a small, cedar-sided cottage on Main Street in Wallowa, with a wood stove and a framed photograph on the wall of her grandmother riding into the valley in 1997 for the first Tamcalix homecoming ceremony. After 120 years of exile, Margaret was a tribal council member and executive director of the Wallowa Homeland Project. I had known her since 1999. She poured coffee for Wyatt, who had never met her, and she poured coffee for me, who had. She sat down at her desk and folded her hands. Cole, what are you bringing me? Margaret, I'm bringing you 2,260 acres of high meadow, clear water, and bad road arrangements. I am asking $7.5 million. I am leaving approximately $3.8 million of fair market value on the table, intentionally. I would like to close in 61 days, if you can move that fast. She did not react for a full 10 seconds. Her eyes went slightly damp, which I had seen twice before in 26 years of knowing her. Cole, the federal grant is approved. The foundation match is secured. The tribe has been waiting for a parcel this size for 18 months. Why this week? I told her. About Corinne, about the juniper, about the stone monument, about the courtesy payments, about Louise's letter, which I had read the night before, and which said, in one line near the bottom, Cole, someday if you can help bring Wallowa home to its first people, you should. Margaret listened. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she stood up, walked around her desk, and put one hand on my shoulder and one on Wyatt's. Your mother, she said to Wyatt, came to this office 3 times in the year before she passed. She walked the meadow with me once. She pointed at the ridge where your great-grandmother Watalatok used to camp in July. She said, I remember it. I still remember it. She asked if someday her family could help. Wyatt nodded. He did not trust his voice. Margaret turned to me. Cole, I need to convene the council this weekend. Monday I will have an answer, but Cole, the answer is yes. The takeaway, and this one is worth writing down. When Native American tribes acquire fee land in their ancestral territory, they can place the land into federal trust status through a process administered by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Once in trust, the land falls under tribal jurisdiction for most internal matters. Even before trust status is granted, the tribe as private landowner has the full set of rights any landowner has, including the right, under state common law, to terminate unrecorded easements with notice. On Monday afternoon, Margaret called me. The council had voted unanimously. On Tuesday, Delilah Radcliffe and the tribe's attorney, a 53-year-old woman from Lapwai named Kate Youngman, began drafting. The purchase agreement included a conservation easement overlay, a carve-out of my 40-acre homestead with a permanent life estate, and a provision, written in Kate Youngman's careful prose, that the tribe would receive all existing encroachments, easements, and encumbrances, including the undocumented graveled roadway informally designated by adjoining Bitterroot Ridge Estates Homeowners Association as Whitaker Parkway, which the buyer shall have full authority to terminate upon acquisition, pursuant to Oregon common law. I read that paragraph in Delilah's office 3 times. I laughed, quietly, only once. Delilah looked at me over her reading glasses. Cole, you know what you're doing, don't you? Yes, ma'am. You're not punishing them. No. You're giving the land to someone who was always going to keep it better than they would. Yes. She signed the cover sheet. She slid the draft across the desk for my signature. I signed. The closing was set for 61 days. On the way home, I stopped at the ridge where Louise was buried. I told her. I told her twice because she used to make me repeat important things. 61 days is a long time to keep a secret in Wallowa County, but it is not long enough to keep one forever. Delilah Radcliffe, Kate Youngman, and I moved with the kind of quiet speed that people in small towns mistake for normal behavior, which is why it works. I closed my ranch books for the fiscal year. I paid every outstanding invoice, every property tax, every state fee. I renewed my agricultural land assessment. I had my cattle herd transferred legally to a small, separate LLC that would continue grazing a lease on my retained 40-acre parcel after closing. The tribe's grant coordinators in Washington, D.C., processed the federal funds transfer in 29 days, which, for a BIA-administered program, is essentially miraculous. Margaret called me the day the money landed in escrow. She said, Cole, the ancestors are helping you along. Delilah structured the sale to include a parallel permanent conservation easement on the homestead parcel I was retaining, recorded with Wallowa Land Trust, so that my remaining 40 acres could never, under any scenario, be converted to residential development after my death. Wyatt, if he wanted it eventually, could have it as working ranch land, or nothing. He had agreed. He was, in his own quiet way, becoming a different man over those 61 days. I met twice with Kate Youngman and the tribe's habitat ecologist, a 26-year-old woman named Winona Penny, to walk the South Meadow and identify the best locations for the future bison paddock, the salmon red restoration zones, and the youth camp lodges. Winona sketched on butcher paper with a green pencil. Wyatt, I noticed, did not take his eyes off her while she drew. Frances Abernathy drove out on a Wednesday evening with a second pan of cornbread. I did not tell her what was happening. I did not tell anyone outside the immediate legal and tribal circle. But I did ask her one quiet question over coffee on the porch. Mrs. Abernathy, if, hypothetically, the road through my land were suddenly the subject of a change, would you be willing to serve as a credible, reasonable voice for the reasonable members of your subdivision? She looked at me for a long moment. Mr. Hargrove, you're doing something, aren't you? I am not going to say, but I am asking. Then yes, whatever it is, yes. I nodded. I poured her another cup of coffee. Meanwhile, Corinne Ashburn was not idle. Sterling Ashburn, her husband, filed a preemptive lawsuit in Wallowa County Circuit Court, asserting a prescriptive easement and requesting a declaratory judgment establishing the road as permanent community property. Delilah filed a motion to stay on grounds of pending real property transfer. She did not specify to whom. The judge granted the stay for 60 days, over Corinne's attorney's objection. Corinne's attorney, I am told, looked confused when the stay was granted. Delilah, I am told, smiled once and said nothing. Corinne, growing paranoid but not informed, began visiting my gate. 3 times in 2 weeks her cream Land Rover pulled up at the cattle guard. She honked. She did not ring the bell. She did not leave the car. I did not come down. Once she filmed herself on Instagram, sitting in the driveway saying, "This is the kind of isolation mountain people live with." Mountain Mama's engagement rate on that post was her highest in 3 months. On day 54, at 1 in the morning, someone shot out my mailbox with a 12 gauge. My driveway trail camera caught a side-by-side UTV with Bitterroot Ridge HOA stickers. The driver's face was not visible. His license plate was. He was Corinne's second cousin by marriage, a 41-year-old from Enterprise named Buddy Haldren, who had spent 2 weekends in 2022 in the Wallowa County Jail for public intoxication. Wyatt saw the footage the next morning, stared at the screen for 40 seconds, and said, "Dad, are we pressing charges?" "We are logging it. We are not pressing. Not yet. The moment will come." "When?" 7 days from now. On day 58, Sterling Ashburn had his corporate counsel send Delilah an offer to settle the road matter for $50,000 in exchange for a fully recorded easement. Delilah forwarded it to me with a 3-word note. Too late. Really. On day 60, I sat on my porch with Wyatt at sunset. The juniper Corinne had destroyed was, by that day, marked with a small wooden stake where the replacement would go. A sapling the tribe's nursery had grown from a cutting of the original, which Winona Penny had quietly taken in the hours after Corinne's chainsaw crew left. We drank the last bottle of Jameson Louise had bought in 2018. We did not say much. The Wallowas turned lavender and then gray. A coyote called, far off, and a second answered from closer in. The next morning, we drove to the Wallowa County Recorder's office in Enterprise. On the morning of the closing, day 61, I woke at 4:40. Wyatt was already up, drinking coffee in the kitchen in the half-dark. He had laid out my father's good Pendleton jacket on the kitchen chair. I had not asked him to. "Dad, your collar's crooked." "Fix it then, son." He did. At 7, we drove into Enterprise. The Wallowa County Courthouse, a stone building with green window frames, sat at the corner of Main and River. The recorder's office was on the ground floor, staffed by a 60-year-old woman named Jolene Reeves, who had, over 26 years, watched me file, in that very office, my father's death certificate, my mother's will, and my own marriage license. Delilah Radcliffe arrived at 7:15 with a banker's box of documents. Kate Youngman, the tribe's attorney, arrived at 7:20 with a leather satchel. Margaret Broncho, the tribe's executive director and my friend for 26 years, arrived at 7:23 with 2 tribal council members, an 82-year-old elder named Oliver Williams, and a single small bundle of sweetgrass wrapped in red cloth. Jolene Reeves, when she saw the procession, stood up from her desk, smoothed her blouse, and said simply, "Well, it's about time." She had, apparently, guessed. The papers were executed at 8:02 a.m. I signed over 2,260 acres to the Nez Perce tribe, acting through a descendant trust established under the Wallowa Homeland Project. Kate Youngman countersigned, Margaret countersigned, Delilah notarized. Elder Oliver Williams, 82 years old, whose grandfather had been born in the Wallowa Valley in 1876 and had been taken out of it at 4 years old in 1877, placed his hand on the final signature page and said, in Nimi Putimpt, a short blessing that lasted about 9 seconds. He translated for Wyatt and me afterward. He said, "The breath of this place has waited a long time. It breathes again today." Wyatt put his hand on my shoulder. He did not say anything. Afterward, we all stood on the courthouse lawn under a clean October sky. Margaret handed me a small wooden disc, sanded and oiled, with a single burned inscription in Nimi Putimpt. She translated it quietly. "The keeper, the one who held." She said, "Cole, you held it for us for 102 years. Thank you." I have a habit, when I cannot speak, of clearing my throat and nodding. I cleared my throat. I nodded. By 10 a.m. we had returned to the ranch, now the Tamcalls Meadow Cultural Restoration Area, with my 40 acres carved out in the center. Kate Youngman sat at my kitchen table with her satchel open. She drafted, on my grandfather's typewriter, which I had suggested she use for the ceremony of it, a formal 30-day notice of termination of encroachment. The notice was addressed to the Bitterroot Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, care of Corinne Ashburn, HOA President. It stated, in plain prose, that the undersigned, as of this morning's recorded transfer, was the new fee simple owner of the land, across which the unrecorded graveled roadway colloquially designated by the HOA as Whitaker Parkway presently crossed. It stated that no easement, license, or written permission currently existed. It invoked Oregon common law and the buyer's sovereign rights as a federally recognized Indian tribe. It gave the HOA 30 days from the date of personal service to vacate the encroachment or enter into a negotiated license agreement. Kate signed it. Margaret countersigned as director. A Wallowa County Sheriff's deputy, accompanying the tribe's representative, a sergeant from the Nez Perce Tribal Police named Willow Spaulding, in uniform at the tribe's request, drove to Corinne Ashburn's home in Bitterroot Ridge Estates that afternoon and served the notice in person. A takeaway worth saving. Personal service by a tribal officer in full uniform, carrying a formal notice from a federally recognized sovereign Indian nation, is a distinctly sobering form of mail delivery. It is not easily misunderstood. It is not easily thrown away. Sergeant Spaulding reported back to Margaret at 4:17 p.m. Corinne Ashburn had answered the door in a bathrobe, holding a glass of rosé. She had looked at the notice. She had looked at Sergeant Spaulding. She had said, in an audible voice, "This has to be a joke." Sergeant Spaulding had replied, politely, "Ma'am, it is not." At 4:37, the tribe's press office released a statement. At 4:41, the Oregon Public Broadcasting Affiliate picked it up. By 6, the national AP wire had it. By 8 that evening, the first car from a Portland television station had pulled up at the Bitterroot Ridge entrance gate, cameras rolling. I watched the local news from my porch. My phone rang once. I did not answer. Corinne Ashburn's first response was to call an emergency HOA meeting for the following evening. She called it on her Mountain Mama Instagram story at 9:30 p.m. the night of the notice, in a yellow pashmina, eyes red, the camera shaky, claiming that her community had been betrayed by a vindictive rancher and a hostile outside force, and demanding that residents rally at the clubhouse the next night at 7. Her follower count dropped by 3,200 over the next 12 hours. By morning, Francis Abernathy had organized a counter meeting. It was held at the same clubhouse, same night, but at 6 p.m., 1 hour before Corinne's. Francis had called 53 of the 96 homeowners personally. 41 showed up. She presented the facts, calmly, with a set of printouts Delilah had prepared for her as a courtesy. She explained the 14 years of courtesy payments. She explained the prescriptive easement failure. She explained the sale to the tribe. She explained the 30-day notice. At the end of her presentation, she said, "Neighbors, we have two choices. We can follow Corinne Ashburn into a fight we cannot win and will not deserve to win, or we can approach the Nez Perce tribe with respect, with humility, and with a willingness to pay for the use of a road that was never ours. I am going to do the second. I invite you to join me." A show of hands. 38 of 41. Corinne's 7 p.m. meeting was attended by 12 people. 7 of them left within 20 minutes. Meanwhile, the national news cycle was doing what national news cycles do. Nez Perce tribe acquires 2,300 acres in ancestral homeland. HOA caught off guard. Ran in the New York Times on day 3. The Washington Post ran a long feature about the Wallowa Homeland Project on day 5. A freelance documentary filmmaker from Seattle called Margaret Bronshow and asked if she could begin pre-production on a piece about the acquisition. Margaret said yes. Corinne, during those 5 days, attempted several moves. She contacted the Oregon Attorney General's office and requested an investigation into abuse of tribal sovereignty. The AG's office issued a polite written response, clarifying that tribal sovereignty is protected by federal treaty and the Oregon Constitution, and that acquisition of fee land by a federally recognized tribe is a lawful private transaction. She contacted the Bureau of Indian Affairs Portland area office. The area director, a 60-year-old career BIA employee named Randall Flute, returned her call within an hour. listened for 5 minutes, and then informed her, also politely, that the only role the BIA played in the transaction was processing the trust status application, which was proceeding normally. He wished her a good afternoon. She called my cell phone directly from a blocked number. I did not answer. She drove up to my gate with a casserole on day 6. I did not open the gate. Wyatt, watching from the porch, said, "Dad, that woman has officially brought 4 pans of food up to this ranch since she got here, and she has never once been invited." She tried to intimidate Wyatt by calling the Idaho Department of Fire Management with a complaint alleging violent threats Wyatt had allegedly made toward HOA residents. Wyatt had been in Boise all week, on a controlled burn, with a documented crew of 19. The IDFM returned her call politely, informing her that false reports to state agencies were a Class C misdemeanor under Idaho Code Section 18-705. They also forwarded the complaint to the Wallowa County Sheriff's Office, who referenced it, quietly, in a growing file. A knowledge nugget worth saving. Many states make it a crime to file a knowingly false complaint against a licensed professional or state employee. If somebody is doing this to you or a family member, request the written intake report through your employer. In most states, the complainant's name is a matter of public record once the complaint is adjudicated as false. On day 7, Corinne finally, belatedly, reached out to Francis Abernathy in an email at 11 p.m., asking Francis to help arrange a meeting with the tribal leadership to resolve this matter. Francis forwarded the email to me, to Delilah, and to Margaret within 15 minutes. Margaret replied, through the Homeland Project's official channels, that the tribe was, in fact, willing to discuss a negotiated license, but that the negotiation would be conducted in a public forum on the tribe's schedule, with full transparency, and not through Corinne. The public forum was set for the 10th day. Corinne was not invited to speak. She came anyway. The Joseph Community Center sits at the corner of North Main and East First in downtown Joseph, Oregon, across from a statue of Chief Joseph the Younger, carved in bronze. The center is a single-story building with a pitched roof and a wall of windows facing the Wallowas. It holds 200. On the evening of the public forum, 231 people arrived by 6:30. Chairs were set up in the parking lot with speakers. Cars lined North Main for 5 blocks. I arrived at 6:52. Wyatt beside me in his Wildland Fire captain's dress jacket, Delilah Radcliffe in a charcoal blazer, Francis Abernathy at my other elbow, carrying a folder of the HOA's 14 years of courtesy payment records, which she had requested from the HOA treasurer under the community transparency bylaws, and which had been turned over without protest. Behind us came Kate Youngman. Behind Kate, Margaret Broncho. Behind Margaret, Elder Oliver Williams, on the arm of his great-niece Winona Penny. Behind Winona, 9 tribal council members in respectful dark clothes, among them 3 tribal youth who had been approved to speak about the upcoming youth camp. Behind them, the Wallowa County Sheriff, in uniform, whose grandfather had been on the search party that brought back the Hargroves horse when my grandfather had fallen in a creek in 1938. Behind the sheriff, the Oregon Public Broadcasting reporter, a Portland ABC affiliate crew, and a young stringer from the New York Times. Corinne Ashburn was already seated in the front row, in a cream vest and a silk scarf printed with a pattern I am told is loosely based on a Salish design. She had arranged to stand and speak first. The meeting organizer, a neutral facilitator from the Joseph Methodist Church, did not accommodate her. Margaret Broncho stepped to the microphone at 7:02. She spoke for 19 minutes. She spoke without notes. She thanked the people of Wallowa County for their hospitality over the past 30 years of the Homeland Project's work. She explained what the 2,300 acres meant to the Nimipu, that it contained the meadow her own great-grandmother had camped in the summer of 1876, a year before the flight. She explained the plans, the bison herd, the salmon habitat restoration, the youth cultural camp, the medicine garden. Then she paused. She looked at Corinne Ashburn in the front row. "Mrs. Ashburn, I understand you have questions. I invite you to the microphone now. The facilitator will allow 3 minutes." Corinne rose. She walked to the microphone with the deliberate composure of a woman who had rehearsed. She began with, "The Bitterroot Ridge Estates community has been blindsided." Margaret held up one finger. "Mrs. Ashburn, before you continue, one question. Where does your subdivision's water come from?" Corinne stopped. From the aquifer." "Which aquifer?" "The one under our subdivision." "The recharge zone for your aquifer," Margaret said, calmly, is on the high meadow Cole Hargrove sold to the Nez Perce tribe 9 days ago, which the tribe now owns, which means, under state law, the tribe now has direct interest in how that recharge zone is managed. In addition to controlling the road, the room was quiet for a long 3 beats. Kate Youngman stepped to the microphone then, and, in her measured voice, laid out the tribe's proposal. The tribe would license a permanent road easement back to the HOA in exchange for 4 terms. 1. A permanent annual licensing fee of $75,000, paid to the Wallowa Homeland Project. 2. Adherence to formal riparian protection standards for Clearwater Creek, at the HOA's expense. 3. A written public acknowledgement of the ancestral heritage of the land, posted permanently at the subdivision entrance. 4. Removal of the Whitaker Parkway signage and monument, and renaming of the road per tribal consultation. The water source would be managed under parallel state water law protections, with the tribe's cooperation. The terms were, everyone could see, not a punishment. They were, instead, a fair price for a road that had never been paid for. Corinne opened her mouth to object. Francis Abernathy, standing 3 feet away, put a hand gently on Corinne's elbow and said, "Corinne, no, sit down." Corinne sat. Francis stepped to the microphone. On behalf of the Bitterroot Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, acting as vice president under the Emergency Succession Protocol, invoked this afternoon by a majority of the board, I accept the tribe's terms in full, and I apologize. I apologize to Mr. Hargrove, I apologize to the tribe, and I apologize to the land. The room did not cheer. The room, instead, was quiet for about 11 seconds. Elder Oliver Williams rose slowly in the second row. He looked at Francis. He nodded. He sat down. Outside the windows, the Wallowas were pink in the last light. The license agreement was executed 17 days later. The $75,000 annual fee flows to the Wallowa Homeland Project's general fund, and from there into bison purchases, youth camp scholarships, and salmon habitat monitoring. The Clearwater Creek riparian buffer was restored by a contractor of Kate Youngman's choosing, at the HOA's cost of $137,000. The whole thing, she observed dryly, could have been avoided by a polite phone call in 2011. The Whitaker Parkway stone monument was removed within 72 hours. Sterling Ashburn hauled it out himself on his own flatbed. A modest wooden sign now stands at the subdivision entrance, carved by a tribal artisan, that reads in Nimiputimpt and English, "Access granted with gratitude. You are a guest on Nez Perce homeland." Corinne Ashburn resigned as HOA president the evening of the public forum. Sterling resigned from the HOA board the same week. Their house went on the market 41 days later. They moved to Scottsdale, Arizona in the spring. Their old home was purchased by a young Forest Service couple with 2 toddlers, who now stop on their way home to admire the replacement juniper sapling that my grandfather's tree has become again. Francis Abernathy was elected HOA president unanimously in the interim. Jed Ogilvie was elected treasurer. Lorraine Pike chairs the Environmental Compliance Committee. Their first act, at Francis's suggestion, was a formal apology letter to me, signed by all 96 households who had lived under Corinne's presidency, which arrived in a manila envelope and which I read on the porch with Wyatt and did not cry until I finished. The Tamcalix Meadow Cultural Restoration Area is now in its 2nd year of operation. 17 bison grazed on the South Meadow last August. Coho smolts were documented in Clearwater Creek by Winona Penny's crew in the spring. The youth cultural camp ran 3 sessions last summer, with 49 tribal kids ages 10 to 17, at least 2 of whom will go on, Winona tells me, to become biologists. The medicine garden sits where the old juniper used to stand, surrounded by a deer wire fence that my son helped build in a single long weekend. I kept my 40 acres. I kept my small cattle herd. I visit the meadow 3 or 4 times a week. The tribal council gave me a permanent honorary seat on the Land Stewardship Committee, which I attend, mostly, to listen. Wyatt began visiting more often. 8 months after the sale, he and Winona Penny were engaged. The wedding was held in the High Meadow last September, under a cedar arbor Elder Oliver Williams blessed, with both families present, mine, fewer than it once had been, and hers, larger than I had ever known any family to be. Louise's ashes had been scattered on the ridge above the meadow on the 1st anniversary of the sale, with tribal permission, and a song I did not understand and did not need to. If this story has a lesson, It is that the loudest version of winning is almost never the truest version. Corrine Ashburn wanted to build a reputation on a road she did not own. She built a cautionary tale instead. My grandfather wrote a one-line promise in the margin of a Bible in 1932. 3 generations carried it. My son and I closed it on a Tuesday morning in October, in a small stone courthouse in Enterprise, Oregon. The breath of the meadow breathes again. If you have a promise your grandfather wrote down, read it this week. If you have an HOA story of your own worth telling, share it in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe for next week's story, where a suburban HOA decides a widow's family mineral rights belong to the community and runs straight into a 100-year-old deed clause nobody bothered to read. I will see you there.
What made Karen Aspen lose wasn't Cohagro's 2,300 acre. It was her belief that the land she had moved onto was somehow empty before she got there. She mistook quiet stewardship for absence. She mistook a windowless grief for weakness. She mistook the past on a silk wrap for a relationship with history. She never once asked before she kept her husband's name in stone on a road that wasn't hers. Whose shoulders the valley actually rests on. Whose real advantage wasn't his real estate license. It was his grandfather, a man who learned the truth about the land he had bought, and who wrote a one-sentence promise in a Bible in 1932 and then kept it through 3 generations in silence until the morning his grandson finally finished it. If your grandfather wrote something down in the margin, open the book this week. Drop your own HOA story in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe for next week, where a suburban HOA decides a widow's family mineral rights belong to the community, and run straight into a 100-year-old deed clause nobody bothered to read. See you there.